Heyo, log 36.0. Time is 12:18 a.m. Saturday, February 26th, UK time. Um, Really quick, hold on. What I'm doing wrong. I don't like hearing myself, just like I actually don't like looking at myself, right? To be honest. I'll have these one-on-ones with people and I don't even want to look at myself. So this week, anyways, what to say about this week? I mean, this is the week that Russia invaded Ukraine, right? I mean, among other things, this week that is the obvious, undoubted headline of the week. What does that mean? I mean, ultimately, I'm not the person to tell you what it what it all means, right? But what does hit close to home than you might imagine, given that our CEO, my boss, is Ukrainian. So that's significant. And he has family there. He's from there. He was like heavily involved in like the Ukrainian Revolution. He was telling me this story when we were grabbing like dinner together one night, right? And I knew he had been there. I'd heard about that much, but I hadn't heard from him like what it was like or what he did or what went down or how it was, anything at all, right? Until he told me, I would say maybe a couple months ago at most, maybe even 6 weeks ago or so. And he was really, I mean, it was a proper urban war, right? There were snipers on the ceiling shooting people dead, dude, and unmarked snipers, right? So who are they? Who can say? I mean, you could assume maybe, right? Like Russian something, right? Position there to kind of shoot people down dead, or who knows, maybe just the government, but unmarked, Ukrainian. Because it was a coup too at that time, essentially, right? I think to call it a coup is incorrect, right? It was like more of a revolution, but don't ask me about politics. Politics is not my forte. I decided long ago that politics wasn't for me, even though at one time I thought it was, right? Or not that it was for me necessarily, but that I was interested in it. I was really actually interested in it when I was young. Just like when I was young, I was kind of obsessed with like high fashion brands. Not that did anything with that obsession, but that obsession, not obsession, maybe obsession is a strong word, but like real interest in, leads me to kind of know my high fashion brands today, I guess, still, right? But back, whatever, that's a tangent. Back to politics. My whole political philosophy, unlike my brother, for instance, is very much Candide, Voltaire's Candide's kind of message, which is never mind the message is delivered by a Turk, no less. So when I read this book, I was like, oh whoa, I didn't know that going into reading it, actually, right? I think it was Speech and Debate, and I think maybe my teacher said something about Voltaire, like, oh, I think you like Voltaire or something, or I don't know what tipped me off to reading it. I definitely picked it up from that Speech and Debate class's room, right? Maybe no one necessarily tipped me off to it, but maybe I came to it myself. Who knows? Does it really matter? I don't know, right? But I read it and was like, whoa, okay. And the message is delivered by a Turk at the end. And after the main characters kind of travel the world, enduring all this sorts of suffering, countless kinds of catastrophes or series of unfortunate events, and after wherever they go, they arrive finally in Turkey, or at least in the end of the book, and they come to I'm trying to remember, having not read it since high school, which is 2 decades ago. Damn, close to 2 decades, not quite, right? Like 19, 18 years. Wow. But they come to this farmer outside of Turkey, outside of Istanbul, Constantinople at the time, and he seems very happy, and his family is very happy, and they're just kind of living off the land like farmers do. And he says, "Oh, you're so happy, you must own so many acres." Like, no, I only own like 20 acres or whatever it is, right? And then they see a ship like going to Constantinople, because I guess there's some type of like drama, right, happening in Constantinople. He's like, "Don't you wonder what's happening there?" He's like, "No, I don't really care." And he's like, "But what about all these, all that you follow, all these produce you create that gets shipped off to don't you wonder like where it goes or like all this or that? No, don't really care. I just care about cultivating my own garden, right? So basically living in a bubble, your bubble, creating your bubble, and not worrying about so much what's outside of it, right? And in many ways, there's pros and cons to this like approach to or philosophy of like life, or approach to the world and your kind of interface with it. The pro is, for me personally, is that it aligns with like how I effectively have become. And I don't know if the book led me to be like this, right? Or if it just reinforced, or you reassured, my perspective to a degree, or if if it's naturally where I would come to personally, whether without having read Voltaire's Candide, in my freshman year of high school. And in speech and debate, no less, which is a very political oriented type class, right? Not that I read it for the class, right? I just picked up the book from the class and read it, right? It's weird anyway. So like, that said, right? Something like Ukraine, right? I could easily be like, oh, it doesn't affect me, right? Not to be necessarily apathetic about other people's suffering necessarily. Not at all, right? It's horrible, that people die needlessly. It's silly, stupid, right? Unfortunate and sad, right? But at the same time, there's another part of me who's like, well, life goes on, right? But that's very, I think, entitled a privilege-like perspective. Like I've been so insulated from any kind of, how would I say, like, egregious, things, right? Like I've been so insulated from it on like a grand scale, just living in the Bay Area. Personally, I felt a lot of it. Feel like I've experienced a lot of injustice, but I've also gotten lucky with the justice system. Also, I benefited from white privilege. Ultimately, most recently, I think, honestly. So I have to feel like I must acknowledge that and do internally. Whether I feel like, regardless of what I feel, I must say or feel like I do feel that I did benefit from white privilege there at the end when I needed it most. But at the same time, like going back to high school on like a micro level, just like there's microaggressions, there's micro injustices, right? That felt big at the time at that age, obviously, but in retrospect, what does it matter? But having experience it just, I think, is important, because I think some people that maybe can't wrap their head around how unjust some things can be until they've really experienced like incredible injustice, like really experienced just straight wrongness inflicted upon them, right? In like a systematic way, or in like a not just randomly, but like like serious deliberate like injustice. I don't know how to explain. I'm exhausted. It's been a tiring week, but that said, like it's out there in boatloads, right? Or all around the world. No matter where you are, maybe in some places more than others, obviously, right? It's not evenly distributed, and just not necessarily, it's everywhere, but it's not evenly distributed either. Something like this, Ukraine thing, right? Like, what does it ultimately mean? Because it's significant, right? So it's important for me, even though I don't think, like I'm not really up with the politics, I don't keep up with the news. I talk about this all the time, even through like Corona, never was keeping up with anything, didn't keep up with the riots, didn't keep up with the elections, all that. And that's not just unique to like the last years, that's been basically me for however long, right? For better or worse, right? But what does this mean, right? So, I've been TikTok, I do TikTok, any downtime I have, I just tend to TikTok. And I've been happy with, the Chinese algorithm and what it's been giving me, honestly, like, like it's dangerously addictive, the most addictive, I think, social media or most addictive internet thing ever to date. It just gets more and more addictive, I guess, as we as time goes on when it comes to kind of social media. But you know, surprise, surprise, it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. But as addictive, dangerously addictive as it may be, I am actually pleased with like what the algorithm's been sending me and what I can kind of make it send me really quickly. I'm really like impressed by its receptiveness to things I like and things that, and it quickly then shows me more like that, right? So something like Ukraine, for instance, you know, granted, I'm sure Ukraine's blowing up everybody's TikTok feed, right? But you know, I'm just really pleased with the responsiveness of the algorithms. It's also kind of dangerous too, because like, and I've been trying, like, if there's a cute girl, I try just not to like it, right? Because I just don't want to get kept sending cute girls, right? Don't keep sending me cute dancing girls with fucking link trees that lead to OnlyFans, you know? Like, no, right? I'm just gonna, or do my best not to. Of course, I wouldn't like it, right? But not even like stay and look, right? It's not just the like that it's obviously responding to, it's how long I stay on the page. Do I swipe right and look at more of their shit, you know, stuff like that. So, you know, try not to fall into that trap, right? Of then all of a sudden getting kind of, you know, modern day low-key sex workers. Those are the OnlyFans, at least. Which of course I've explored. Yeah, I've checked it out, see what it's about. I paid my dues, right, to see what this OnlyFans is about. I've done it twice, right? So I did it like, what, I would say about a year ago, right? I checked it out. And then it was, you know, these girls were really like doing a lot for a little, right? You know, low subscription, and you would see, you know, a lot, big straight up porn, you know? And then like a couple of weeks ago, you know, subscribed again just to see what's about. And now I feel like everybody, all the girls got more expensive, you know, like, and then second of all, I followed some girls, I was like, and it was a lot more teases, right? So that makes sense, right? It's the bandwagoners jumping on to make the money that aren't the same, like, you know, pure whores, right? That got it started, right? You know, I paid some money for some stuff, and it's like, you know, obviously pay to see, and I'm like, behind what I saw, I was just like, what the fuck? I just got bamboozled, right? Then I was like, then to do another one, same situation. And I'm like, okay, this has changed, you know. But anyways, so back to Ukraine, which, by the way, Ukraine has some of the most beautiful women in the world, right? So Levchenko, that high jumper, good example, right? But what is it? So I think the real significance of this invasion on Ukraine, not for me to be the one to really say, but in my mind's eye, and the real significance is that it maybe like represent really kind of the end of globalization in a sense. It's called the end of globalization, it's a ridiculous overstatement, but you know, real shift. So it's more than just, you know, Russia invading Ukraine, which, you know, used to be part of, you know, the Soviet Union, and anyhow, and I don't know, it's kind of, I mean, they already have done it. This is not, they haven't done it to this degree, but I mean, the annexing of Crimea, I mean, they've already invaded Ukraine. It's not the first time, even in the last, what, decade, right? They did it, what, in 2015, right? So nothing new there, but the scale and the severity of this is a little different, because it's a real like total invasion of like, even, you know, into their capital, you know. So all that's very significant. So obviously that's, you know, the people evacuating, all the children and women, and the men staying, and, you know, it's in Ukraine's, you know, democratic, right, country, all that, whatever. I'm not trying to dismiss that. The real most significant thing about it is the needless deaths. But on like on a global macro kind of scale, what is like the domino effect, so to speak? So think back to like 9/11. You know, that was very significant. Obviously, the, you know, collapsing of the towers, the deaths of like, what, over 3,000 people. You know, but what really changed, what was really significant about 9/11 is what like followed it, right? So all these huge changes, you know, around like, even like around civil liberties, right? You know, we went to war in Afghanistan, Iraq, right? We were in those wars. I mean, those were two of our longest wars ever, right? And Afghanistan in particular. what else did it lead to? Like, I think the Islamification of, a big part of the world, radicalization, radicalization. It's almost like for every action, there's a reaction, so to speak. And, I think America's reaction led to more radicalization, actually, right? Of course, in my mind, there's no doubt about that statement. So, and then of course, lesser things like it changed the way we travel forever, didn't used to be like people not even remember. It's even hard for me to remember just how it was before 9/11. The travel was very different. And then, the real most serious thing too is probably the thing I can't even speak to, which is, what it's done in terms of, intelligence and, NSA and what the Patriot Act enabled and has enabled, and, all those little under the radar things, right, that come out of or came out of 9/11 that are really quite significant too. What does this one mean, if I had to guess, right, or had to say? I think it's really kind of indication of kind of to a degree, kind of the curtailing or the rolling back of like globalization in this sense. So, previously it was all, the idea here was, we all trade with one another, right? The whole world trades one another. It's peace, there's peace and there's prosperity and, economic, economic, how do you say, development, right? Like worldwide, right? And this is, the money talks, right? No need to fight wars, no need to invade anymore. Even the idea of an invasion still just seems so archaic for me of my generation. Like, I know we invaded Iraq and we invaded Afghanistan, right? But like the idea of like invasion just feels so, I don't know, it feels so old, like old, I don't know how to say, right? Archaic, right? Like, and war like this, right? And then even this is this much of a war. I mean, it's kind of just like they're rolling over Ukraine, right? But of course, Ukraine's fighting back. I don't want to kind of downplay or, their resistance, right? But what I mean is like there's also this other element too. So I don't know if this will lead to anything, but the second topic after Ukraine is actually Taiwan, ironically, right? So we're talking about global politics and posturing and war movement, war games, right? After Ukraine, it's Taiwan. And it's interesting because Taiwan is to China. Is to China kind of like Ukraine is to Russia in a sense. I know anyone could argue and explain to me why I'm getting that way wrong. I understand, right? But it is interesting, right? That Russia, kind of, and China too, and both on both sides, there's NATO up against them. They're not up against them, but up against their borders, basically. I mean, Japan's part of NATO, Korea's part of NATO. Then you have Australia, New Zealand, South, all kind of converging there in like the South China Sea, right? Of which, Taiwan has an incredibly strategic, position. And actually Taiwan's more, I think, strategic to America than Ukraine is, right? To be honest. But I also think China's kind of just as maybe a more formidable force now than even Russia is, right? I think that for sure. Whether it's true militarily or not, right? It's more than just like the military kind of factor, right? It's interesting because then I saw these other things, and maybe this is just the media kind of making that something out of nothing, but they're like, oh, now there's, jets have been scrambled over Taiwanese airspace, right? Just made this Ukrainian thing creates a distraction. The Western world doesn't want to get involved in two conflicts on two sides, right? This is why did Putin act now, right? Why did he act now? Is because now, you realize this is now also a good time maybe for China to kind of act, right? And not to suggest I think that China would invade Taiwan. I don't think China would play that way. That's not China's way, right? The Russians are crazy like that, right? But like the Chinese play a little different, inch by inch. I think they're a little have their own style, right? As do the Russians, right? And they're very different. And I know I'm totally generalizing and stereotyping, but sometimes it makes sense, right? Or this doesn't make sense in my head. Um, so what am I trying to get at here, right? So first of all, I think that there does need to be like, I do believe in almost like a risk board balance of power. I do believe it is critical that there be kind of like, you know, separate powers to balance one another, right? I think it gets problematic when you just have two powers, right? Just like we saw with the Cold War, just like we see with a fucking two-party system, the American US government, right? Not it's deadlocked, dude. Nothing can get through, right? It's just boom, boom, boom. And having been one of two siblings, very much like that too, you know, you just I don't know. I don't know that a bipolar world, right, really works very well. But I do think that if there is, you know, different kind of, how would you say, like almost like a coalition, right, of the world, but you know, there's different spheres of influence is not the correct thing, but like, sure, let's just say spheres of influence. And I was up late last night just reading like about like the Crimean War, right? Because Crimea is part of was part of Ukraine, but before Russia annexed it, right? And I was just really curious about. I never read up on the Crimean War. It's kind of like who really teaches or learns about the Crimean War, especially coming up from America. You know, Turkey was involved with that. The British were involved with that. French and Russians. It's very interesting actually when I read about it. And it was really just like whack ass war. It was all, and ultimately, it was all just kind of about like posturing and like correcting for this like balance of power in the, you know, European theater, right? Where am I going with this? I have no fucking clue. Like I said, I don't really think politically, but I'm trying to right now because it's just a very political situation, right? You know. Where am I going with this? I was saying kind of like the rolling back of globalization, which I think maybe actually, surprise, surprise to many who know me to maybe hear me say this, for the best. Okay, so a good example is like, let's talk like energy independence, right? So energy self-reliance, let's call it. I'm sure it has a proper policy wonk word, right, or phrase. But, you know, big problem is with Russia is a lot of Europe gets its energy from Russia, particularly Germany, which has really dragged its feet in its response to Russia, you know, in all this build up to this invasion of Ukraine. And that's because they're wholly dependent upon Russia for a big part of their natural gas, because natural gas is actually like an improvement on coal, right? You know, these countries moving to natural gas is a step in the right direction. But you know, vast majority, like I think half of their natural gas or a third or something, you know, significant regardless, they can't do without. It doesn't matter how much they can't do without, you know, comes from Russia. And their dependence on this natural gas is made more serious by the fact that, I don't know how long ago, but you know, a couple of decades, I think with Fukushima, right? With the Fukushima disaster, they as a country decided, right, to decommission kind of their nuclear plants, right? And just, you know, steer away from that method, I guess you'd say, of sustainable energy, right? The problem with that is, and I understand the impulse, right? I mean, when we all saw what happened to Fukushima, I think Fukushima's still been brushed under the rug. Not to be like a conspiracy theorist, but I think the impact of Fukushima is greater than we might even realize. I mean, what that did to the seas, right? Ooh, I mean, I know we talk about, you know, the great kind of, what is it, the litter island? What did they call it? I don't know. In the middle of the Pacific, right? But I think that the Fukushima is bled into the Pacific and may still be bleeding into the Pacific, right? It might be the biggest, like, you know, bigger than anything, right? But we don't, you know, what can you do maybe? So why report, right? I don't know. So I understand the impulse, right? That said, nuclear energy is, I think, the most, my understanding, like one of the cleanest, most sustainable, efficient, like methods of like energy. And if that's true or not, somebody tell me otherwise, right? Whether it's true or not, if they did kind of not decommission their plants, they wouldn't be as reliant on importing natural gas or other sources of energy, right? They could be more energy reliant, self-reliant. But in the philosophy of like, you know, globalization, it's like, okay, we get our gas from you, and we export this to you, and you give us this. Everyone kind of has their specialties, right? You know, like I don't know, like the like the sectors in the Hunger Games. I don't know, you know, like you do the, anyways, we specialize, so you don't have to do it all, right? And this is supposed to be, you know, the benefits of global. It makes sense, you know, this kind of cooperation for, if China can own manufacturing, America can focus on like services, and everybody kind of plays a part that they either fall into or are cornered into or choose or what, right? But with something like this, like Russia, moving in on Ukraine, and there's the complications of, you know, Europe being so reliant on Russia for energy, and even like with Corona, right? We saw it with China. I think we're still seeing with China, right? Like the issues on the supply chain. You know, this whole dependence upon China is, I think, really rethought. You know, when we see with this, you know, COVID, kind of how it had a huge disruption on the whole world. And even another example too, right? Even that fucking ship, right? Getting fucking stuck in the Suez Canal, you know, had like a huge, you know, like impact on like the whole world, right? Not huge, right? But like, you know, they did have a significant domino effect across, you know, the whole world, because the whole world is like interconnected in this like globalization, right? You know, like at this point, like maybe using America example, but England's a perfect example too. I mean, used to be a very industrial country where people be working in factories. There were factory jobs to be had. There are factories, you know, here to produce things. Now these, you know, England in particular doesn't, and that was for longest time really its thing, right? Factories, right? And industrial revolution, and now there isn't now, and that creates its own problems, because there's a whole, you know, what used to be a middle class that would work in like the factories, and maybe they could make a decent wage and be part of the unions, and, you know, maybe, you know, have a job, right? Now there's, you know, almost like a chasm, right? It's like, what do these people do, right? They work in like the service industry now, but you know, the service industry, yeah, anyways. What I am saying here though is that, you know, like England doesn't produce anything anymore, you know. America doesn't produce anything really anymore, right? Everything's shipped in from, you know, China, Taiwan, whatever. And all that's okay when we're talking maybe about toys, or even like electronics, maybe, right? And I think it is important for you to have your own fabs, though. I mean, America's hugely dependent on Taiwan for even their fabs, right? When it's talk about like the tech, you know, semiconductor industry. But I think there is something to be said about maybe countries getting back to at least having what they need in-house. You know, not outsourcing what they need so much. Some things, you know, you have to outsource because you don't have, right? England and Turkey, they don't have any oil. They need to import that. That needs to be, that's what they need to bring in, right? Got it, right? And there's certain elements of that. But like when it comes like the Germany example, at least, you know, when it comes to that type of energy, I mean, maybe you do need to build the power plants so you aren't reliant on, you know, natural gas from others. Maybe America does need to build its own kind of factories again, so we aren't reliant on parts and whatnot, or even chips from, you know, being made in Taiwan, right? To you know, that doesn't create, you know, maybe there is something to be said about that, right? And there certainly is, right? I mean, that was a philosophy. That was the whole idea of like tariffs way back when, as far as I understand. I mean, that's tariffs were what saved, you know, Harley Davidson, right? They basically put up huge tariffs so that, you know, Harley Davidson could compete, right? And then make a comeback. And there's other, you know, examples here as well, where there's, you know, certain things where the government decides this is critical that we have in-house, and, you know, we're going to protect this industry. But with globalization, a lot of that kind of fell away. And I'm not saying that globalization is necessarily bad. And I'm not even saying that, I don't know what I'm saying, to be honest, right? I'm just speaking. But I do think it is an inflection point on the reconsideration of globalization. That's my thesis. This is an inflection point on the reconsideration of globalization. Allow me to go away and not do anything with that thesis. Right? I'm about to write shit, not about, but that's what you gotta, say and then think about and write. I can't just fucking spew because I'm not that privy to politics. If I was really up with it, right, I could speak, I think, probably more easily, freely and easily and intelligently, right? But I'm not, so I can't, right? Blah. So this week I also first VC pitch meeting of my life. So I've been to a bunch of board meetings, but first where there are VCs in the board meetings, but first time we pitched to some VCs. So this was great, but really well. It's like 10 people on the Zoom call. I didn't count actually, but at least 10, probably maybe more because there was at least 10. And all surprisingly young. I was surprised. I think they're all what they're called, maybe associates, or I don't even know what their titles are, but a lot of just young ones. And it's a big VC firm, at least out here in the UK, probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest. Yeah, it went well, and I was really pleased about that. And my CEO obviously did the whole pitch deck, right? And me and the VP of sales, chimed in where appropriate. But it's funny because that was the day that Russia invaded Ukraine, and he's Ukrainian, right? And at the end, our board member, who was part of that 10 or 12 or whatever it was, listening in, made a comment about it, oh, thank you, Bogdan, for all that, and also especially given all the events of today, I'm sure you were distracted, and really well done, right? Just a nice touch at the end, right? As far as the sympathy card, right? This guy's Ukrainian and he just delivered a great pitch, when as we speak, he has family in Ukraine, the Russia's invading his homeland. It went really well, though. It was cool to kind of be a part of that as well. I've never before been a part of that, and we'll see if I ever get to be a part of it again. We'll see. And this was a whack ass one. I'm sorry, guys. I rambled pretty incoherently on this, I think, more than most, if not any. And I'm exhausted. I think I blame my exhaustion. That said, yeah, I'm done. We'll keep it at that. Sorry for wasting your guys' time if you listen to this one. There's other things I guess I could talk about, but I'll talk about them more as they develop, right? Trying to do this company retreat in May. Finally decided on a time with the team, or a week with the team today. So that's ahead of us. Never really done a company retreat before. Heard about them, all the time. Growing up in the Valley, the company retreat, right? But I'd never really been a part of one. We'd done a day away with Lean Data, right? We went whitewater rafting, and a day away to go paintballing, and that was great. But I've never done a proper retreat, day and night, right? 3 nights, 3 days. And it's fallen on me to kind of organize. I have no clue where to book anything or where we should go or anything like that. That I'm deferring, right? But the kind of coordination and of it all, when should we go? And then ultimately help, picking, where, what, and what we do there, right? Kind of thing. But it's not all on me. Obviously it's a very collaborative effort, but I'm excited for it, and more to report on that as it kind of approaches and the plan kind of materializes. Well, we'll leave that. Much love. Oh, one thing to know about all this, I talked very little about work this time. I just spoke very incoherently about topics I didn't fully understand instead, right? But yeah, here I just said very quickly VC and company retreat, but this time was, I think, the first time. If there is anything unique to say about this one, is that it was the first one easily where the vast majority of the shit coming out of my mouth wasn't about work. So maybe I'm turning a page here with the invasion of Ukraine. But much love, be happy, and do good. Love you, Mom.